Good afternoon and welcome to episode 5 of Perspectives on Sustainable Development. I am Chris Whitehead, your host, and I've been very, very humbled thus far by the incredible amount of support that this podcast has gotten and the questions and interests that we've had in furthering these topics. Anyone who's listened thus far knows that environmental justice, climate change, sustainability, all issues I care about very, very deeply, but also things that to do right, you have to try and stay as objective as you possibly can and think about it on a project level is kind of how I think about it. Just from my experience, work on these things for a bit. And we're going to spend time today talking with a couple of experts on New York and things going on there, but also specifically on the transportation sector, one of the hardest to debate from climate change perspectives, and also one that has a bit of a troubled history historically when it comes to impacts in environmental justice areas. And we're going to talk a lot and hopefully learn a lot from these two absolutely brilliant people who I deeply respect. And it's been one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is just learning more about these topics and hopefully inspiring others to try and uh, to try and dig into these things a bit further and learn more about topics that interest them, because none of this stuff is going away anytime soon, and it's the types of larger challenges and larger questions that are going to really shape how the next decades are actually handled in this country. So with that, I have the great honor today of bringing on Rebecca Bratspies and Tom Abdallah. So guys, if you don't mind coming on camera.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
And I'm not one on doing big introductions, so I told Rebecca and Tom they'd each have opportunity to give a quick bio on themselves. So in the interest, ladies first. Rebecca, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Bratspies. I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law, where I run the Center for Urban Environmental Reform. I'm a scholar of human rights and environmental justice. I write mostly about New York City and about participatory processes here, about how we site our polluting infrastructure, about where the roads are, about where the public transit is, and what that means for the lives of ordinary people and the way that the burdens and benefits are distributed unequally. I also make environmental justice comic books that we can talk about later if you want. They're available free, by the way, for anybody who wants to download them for a nonprofit or educational use. And I recently wrote a book about New York City using infrastructure as a way into history and who the people are that we name things after. It's called Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and City. Wrong. Let me say the name of my book properly. It's called Naming Gotham, the Villains, Rogues, and Heroes Behind New York Place Names.
Very, very interesting. And I think I mentioned this also actually, but if there's ever a thing you screw up or you say wrong or something, we'll scrub that part out. So don't worry about that. Thank you. Let's see. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, my name is Tom Abdallah. I am the Chief Environmental Engineer for the MTA Construction and Development Agency. I've been with MTA since 1987. I started as an assistant environmental engineer. I worked my way up to chief environmental engineer, and I was a DVP, and then a AVP, and now I'm a vice president of environmental services. MTA recently transformed into a different agency. Well, at least they added one agency that took all the capital design, engineering, and construction from each of the agencies and put them into one giant agency. New York City Transit runs trains and the buses, Metro North Long Island Railroad bridges and tunnels. So I've been doing that environmental work my whole career. I'm also adjunct professor at Columbia University in the School of Professional Studies Sustainability Management Program. And I also have a role at City College as well in the Charles Brangle Workforce Development Initiative. I'm the transportation curriculum lead. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So we're CUNY colleagues. Cool.
Yes.
There you go. And thank you again both for being on. As I said in a quick intro, it was important to me to try and do an episode on New York relatively early on in this process because it was really formative my development looking into these issues as over the past decade and a half, New York did things like issuing Plan NYC and all their climate change work. And I obviously understand, Rebecca, you've been on the EJ working groups lately, and there've been quite a few things coming out there. I wonder if you wanted to start off chatting about that a little bit and what that process was like.
Sure. So in 2017, New York City Council passed, and then Mayor de Blasio signed 2 environmental justice laws. And those laws committed New York City to doing a serious introspection, an investigation of environmental injustice within New York City, writing a report about sort of the parameters of environmental injustice. That is the tool that we're now going to use to make a plan going forward for how to change things. So just a couple weeks ago, New York City's a terrible acronym is MOC-EJ, but it's the Climate and Environmental Justice Office released the New York City Environmental Justice Report, and it is a really impressive document that takes a serious look at not only how we're distributing benefits and burdens that, environmental amenities, environmental bads, things like polluting infrastructure across New York City, but how we got here, what the history is that got us to this point, because without really understanding the historical drivers for this kind of structural inequality, it's really hard to change things. So the report just came out. It's available online. It was my great honor to be on the New York City Environmental Justice Advisory Board. We are a group of people appointed by the mayor and by city council to give advice to the city through this process. And so we held a number of public hearings, and we held many, many rounds of consultation with the city to try to make sure that as the city was developing the scope of this analysis and then implementing this analysis, they were hearing from the people in environmental justice communities, so that the ultimate plan that emerges from this report will sort of be responsive to the concerns that people on the ground have.
And I think that's really a critical element that often gets addressed, unfortunately, occasionally just as buzzwords by some, but meaningful public engagement and actually understanding what's being asked by the community, what their interests are, and what they want happening in their community going forward. So just out of curiosity, I don't know if you could comment on this or not, but was there anything that the community wanted that kind of got left on the cutting room floor that might not have gotten into the final rule?
Yes, absolutely. With the caveat that this cannot, one report cannot encompass everything. There were 2 critical, from my perspective, critical points that didn't make it into the final report. One is about the dynamic of gentrification. The city just said that is beyond the scope, because a lot of that is about private economic activity that's beyond the scope of what we're examining here. You got to draw boundaries somewhere. It's maybe not the one I would have drawn, but I wasn't in charge. And the other was the decision to adopt the state definition of disadvantaged communities. And the state, through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, went through a very detailed process of defining disadvantaged communities. There are a couple of problems with the definition that are particularly troublesome here in New York. One is that there was no consideration of noise impacts. And when people hear that, they might think, oh, you have a loud neighbor. But when I say noise, I'm talking about Queens, where I live, has 2 airports. And the noise burden of those airports is immense, not only from the planes taking off and landing, which is in and of itself is a huge noise burden, but also from all of the traffic, all of the trucking associated with shipping through those airports, right? There's a tremendous noise burden there that was just invisible to the city process. And as a result, neighborhoods that would otherwise qualify didn't qualify. And then also, because it's a state process, there was a concern to spread investment across the state. So they didn't just use a cutoff of the most impacted communities are the disadvantaged communities, because if they did, they felt like too many of them would be in New York City, and they wanted to make sure that upstate was represented in some kind of an adequacy fashion. So that meant that communities, disadvantaged communities here in New York City, were excluded that should have been included. And by the city adopting that same metric of disadvantaged communities for the assessment, they were replicating that problem.
That's really interesting, but I gotta be honest, not terribly surprising. This is something we hear relatively often in other states. And I want to actually get to Tom next too. Transportation and large infrastructure projects in general are obviously complex things. They take time, span a number of neighborhoods. And as I alluded to in my open, historically have been bad things at times for people in environmental justice areas if proper planning and thought was not put into certain things, or unforeseen circumstances come up. What, over time, what processes might have been put in place to try and learn from past errors?
So you're talking about from the mass transportation or just general transportation?
I was just talking about general to start with.
Yeah, so, being somewhat of a, interest in history, I think as an environmental professional, you really have to know your history so you can, help in the future. Obviously, large infrastructure projects specifically, and I may be a little biased here, but, the highways here in New York City, cut neighborhoods in half, destroyed some neighborhoods, moved, so I don't think there was a lot of thinking about how to keep neighborhoods connected, and ultimately what ultimately happened was segregated neighborhoods that didn't get connectivity to other parts of the city, specifically when it came to transportation. But the train and bus system here, obviously, going back to 1904, the subway system and the elevated trains and the buses, we're connected. The MTA is one agency amongst few that actually run both trains and buses. If you go to other cities, there's a bus system and there's a train system, and if there's a train system at all, there's usually, they're usually separated. So I think over time, when we do consider capital improvement projects, which we need to, because we have the infrastructure that's fallen apart, and we need to keep it in a state of good repair. We need to address some of those situations that had happened in the past. And one of the ways is that we are, and I'm talking specifically about here in New York City, we're getting we're electrifying our buses, right? So we're trying to use battery operated buses to replace diesel buses, and so the idea is to phase that in the disadvantaged communities first, and that's on the drawing board, and I think that's one of the ways that you can. That's just kind of a current thing, ways of righting a few wrongs, because at some point, I mean, obviously, electricity still is a fossil fuel, burning activity in some parts of, New York State's pretty good actually when it comes to some of the mixes. At least we do have a lot of hydroelectric and working toward more renewable energies. We're not where we need to be yet, but we'll get there. But specifically, there are some neighborhoods in this city that are specifically, they have high levels of PM particulate matter, the smaller PM 2.5, and going toward electric vehicles, electric buses, electric trucks, at some point is good for the air quality here in the city. Again, getting past the fact we still are mass transit is the most sustainable way of traveling, but it just still has its carbon footprint,
Oh,
and
sure.
that also is what my role is to try to make it more sustainable than it already is.
That's very interesting. You brought up a lot of stuff there, but I want to first start on the benefits of mass transit versus individual transit options. And a lot of my work recently has been in South Jersey and Philadelphia on the impacts of particulate matter 2.5 and being tied to things like asthma, COPD, cardiovascular. And I think the type of electrification you're talking about is really important. But what type of work or studies or whatever you want to say is done before you make a push for the electric buses, for the electric vehicles, or possibly said another way, how do you know that's actually where your money is being spent actually best?
Well, I'm going to go back to the 90s because I've been here since 1987. So I've kind of have a been I was there when we were being criticized or being sort of questioned about our diesel emissions, specifically in the buses. And there were community groups back then looking for us to do things, and there was a lot of pushback at that time. I know, I was there, but the engineers, so we came up with a few things. We came up first. People probably don't remember. We actually did experiment. We actually still have compressed natural gas buses. In fact, we probably have around there's two bus depots, one in Brooklyn and one in Bronx, that have compressed natural gas fueling stations. So we started running, which again, it's methane, it's natural gas, but while it's the cleanest of the fossil fuels, it's still a fossil fuel. So there's still issues there. The people at that time who were running the bus department, they didn't care for them way too much. And one of the things that was also an issue is when you have CNG, compressed natural gas fueling stations in your bus depot, you have to explosion proof the entire building. And so there was a lot of intensive capital infrastructure needed to change just to go to CNGs. So they went toward a couple of things first. We went toward low sulfur, ultra low sulfur diesel. In order for that to be effective, you had to retrofit each one of the buses with a diesel particulate filter. And so they went to that, and that was something that was very successful. It did actually, capture a lot of the, the pollution on the back end of a bus. But also in the mid 90s, and a lot of people don't remember this, but I do. We began the hybrid bus program. In 1996, we had 10 hybrid buses, and we ran them as a kind of a pilot. And the good news there for our current or the past bus people was that they didn't have to change their infrastructure. They could still use the same diesel tanks. They could still use the same equipment. The only thing they had different now was there was an actual extra battery in the bus that would actually be a dual way of and it did reduce emissions at that time. So obviously now that actually is moving. I'll just 1996 we had 10, 2006 we had 1,000, but it was actually one of the things that MTA was a kind of a guinea pig. We had car and bus manufacturers studying everything that we did. Do they work? What's the issues with the driving and all those complicated things that the bus people would always tell us are an issue. But there was a lot of study being done, and the federal government, even through Transportation Research Board, funded some studies so that those studies could be made, and how can we make the hybrids better, and how can we make the emissions even better, and how can it work better here in New York City. So by 2006, we had 1,000, and then 1,400 at some point. Now, obviously, we're moving toward electric vehicles. So I do think that it's a togetherness. You know, the city, the activists, the environmental activists, the scientists, the engineers. You know, we all, you know, got together. And, you know, again, one thing I know for sure is, you know, especially neighborhoods like Harlem and Chinatown, there's a lot of kids with asthma. There's a lot of adults with asthma, but, you know, it's really difficult for children, you know, on days of the heavy particles in the atmosphere. You know, you have to bring, you know, really little kids to the emergency room sometimes. So it was something that, you know, I happen to have been very much part of, and I learned a lot. You know, one thing is, as a young engineer, you know, I was, this is for the kids out there. Keep your ears open. Pay attention to what's going on with the higher level people, so that, you know, one day you're going to be in that position, or you hope to be, and so you can actually even, you know, take it up the bar a little bit further up.
Absolutely. And that's a goal of this podcast and some of the other efforts we've been doing the last couple of years, just from hearing from people in community groups that they have interest in these topics and want to learn, but don't have the capacity or don't know where to go, frankly. So actually,
Before we
Rebecca,
move on, could I
please.
just add one thing about the buses, is because I want to make sure that people understand that the concern was not just the bus going down the street. The big environmental justice concern was the bus depots, which were consolidated in a couple of communities. So it was a couple of communities that were dealing with all of the buses coming in and idling there and refueling there. And it was that burden that was really driving community activism, particularly in West Harlem by We Act, but not just by them, to make changes within the bus fleet that would reduce the burden in those communities.
It's a very important point, I think, and it kind of goes to what I was going to ask you next, actually, Rebecca. Part of your book naming Gotham touches on the history of large infrastructure and roadways throughout the state, but especially the city. I wonder, was there any type of inflection point over the years where building these things started to really just take off? And if that did happen, were environmental safeguards even in place at that time, or was it kind of not even a thought yet?
No, not at all. You know, Robert Moses had a vision for the city, and by God, it was going to happen. And his vision was that roads were to move people through neighborhoods rather than roads being part of neighborhoods. So we see a reorientation of the city. We see a dismantling of the tremendous trolley network and electric network that existed in the city, and a replacement with roads that were designed to get people from Westchester and Long Island into Manhattan and out of Manhattan through neighborhoods, regardless of how that cut those neighborhoods open. And at the time, not only was there no environmental regulation at all, there was an actual official policy from the federal government to use roads as a way to build segregation into urban centers. And the Federal Housing Authority advised that roads could be a way to protect desirable communities, I'm using air quotes here, from what they called infiltration by inharmonious racial groups, by which they meant Black people and Jews. And so, you know, our road system is structural racism, and that was its intention, our highway system. You know, we're seeing change now, right? The Cross Bronx Expressway is sort of everybody's textbook example of what that looked like in practice, to deploy a road to destroy a community and to segregate a community. And now we're talking about what's its future going to be, right? We're having an actual conversation about whether to dismantle it, whether to cover it, how to reframe it. The Sheridan Expressway no longer exists. It's now a street level Sheridan Boulevard. You know, the community did not get what they particularly wanted in that conversion from a highway overpass to a street level road, but it's a whole lot better for them than it was. And we're seeing that conversation around the state. We're seeing it in Syracuse, we're seeing it in Buffalo, and we're seeing it more and more here in in New York City. We're also talking about it in terms of the Cross Bronx Expressway.
That's very interesting, but I have to wonder, frankly, if those extremely congested roadways like the Cross Bronx, I've been stuck in traffic there so many times, like I'm sure everyone here was also, if the fact that it is as congested as it is, does it limit the options that you have for what other alternatives you might be able to put in place?
So they were all built to relieve congestion. Every single one of those highways was built as this will relieve congestion. And you know what? Building roads creates congestion. The more, there's a 1-for-1 correlation. The wider a road is, the more people use it. The more roads you have, the more people drive. The way to solve the problem of congestion is to sort of work with my friend Thomas here to build more and better mass transit to get people out of their cars and onto the trains and buses. And that improves quality of life, it improves air quality, it reduces our carbon footprint. It is a win-win for everybody except the oil companies and the auto manufacturers.
That's a great segue, actually, too. Tom, I was going to ask you about this. She beat me to it by a little bit, but a controversial topic right now in the area is congestion pricing. Also, many people think with the intention of pushing more people towards mass transit. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
Yeah, I would love to, because I think I'm going to go back to when Mayor Bloomberg was our mayor. So congestion pricing came up then. This was not sort of Johnny come lately. This was something that the thought, but and the driver there was, let's get people out of their cars and into mass transit, right? And so didn't happen. Coming now post-pandemic here, the messaging is, let's get congestion pricing so that we can pay for mass transit upgrades, which is fine. And in fact, that's actually something traditional, like the tolls on the MTA bridges, they're there to pay for the upgrades of the transit system. So it wasn't ultimately something new either, but I would have looked at it, I would have hoped, and again, the messaging should have been, let's solve the pollution issue first. In Milan, Italy, I was there about 10 or 12 years ago, and they had an emergency, a health emergency. Milan is kind of like in a bowl, and it's kind of and so they actually did a congestion price. They actually, you had to pay to get into to the city limits. And depending if you had a very tiny little smart car, it was only €2. But if you had a big car, it was like 8, 9, 10 euros. So that actually worked, and actually reduced the amount of pollution in that city. So I'm an environmentalist. To me, get money from wherever. But I'd like to see the congestion pricing get people onto mass transit. And I mean, I take the express bus every day. Like, I live in Bay Ridge or Tiger Heights, Brooklyn, and I work here in Lower Manhattan. So it's like the express bus is like great. It's an HOV lane. And I actually wave to people in traffic. There are people in traffic on the BQ, right? Much like the Cross Bronx and the other areas where it's always traffic. Well, the BQE from Staten Island into Manhattan is always in traffic. And so I'd like to see more mass transit options, including more express buses, of course, electric, hopefully, and more transportation urban planning where we can move, people in comfy, reliable transit as opposed to, using a car. Before the pandemic, we had average around, 6 million people on the trains every day and about 2.5 million on the buses. Post-pandemic, I think the buses is back, but the trains, it's only 4 million. And so where are these people? And I can't all be working from home, or maybe some of them are, but I think the people driving came back to the pre-pandemic, but we have to get people back on trains. So we have to make it reliable, we have to make it safe, we have to make it comfortable, we have to make it on time, we have to make it,
And we need 6-minute service. Like it can't
Yes.
be 15
Good
minutes
point.
till the next bus or
Yeah.
train.
And we need to also connect, and again, believe me, I've been working with brilliant people here at MTA for a long time. They do care about connecting the buses and the trains and coordinating that and trying to, get those in those transit deserts that have to kind of take the bus to get to the train and that.
I live in one of those.
There's, so many plans, one project that I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be a while, but we're actually working on a light rail system from Queens to Brooklyn. If here in New York, we have what we consider heavy rail. You go to Philadelphia, they have heavy rail. They probably have some electric streetcars as well. Boston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., maybe Atlanta. That's it. Everything else is light rail systems. If you go into European and Asian, they have a lot more heavy rail, but they also have light rail systems as well. So I like to see more light rail systems. I do think that, that's it's not heavy tunneling. We're expanding the Second Avenue line from 96th Street to 125th Street. That's going to take 7 years to get to 3 stations. So we have to do more immediate things now, and I think one aspect is good thing is nowadays you can find out when your bus is coming, when your train's coming. That's at least you're on the platform and you see, okay, it's 11 minutes. All right, at least it's 11 minutes. But sometimes you remember when I was a kid, I'd wait on the platform and I'm like, when is this train coming?
Yeah.
You have no idea. You have no idea whether it was stuck. So now you have a little bit more information, a little bit more data, a little bit more reliability when it comes to mass transit. We have to convince people. Now, the good news is here in New York City, half the people don't even own a car. So you can survive here in the city. And I went to Rutgers University, so I've been New Jersey,
I just talked to my wife.
What's that?
Talked to my wife, actually.
Yeah. So, that's a more car-centric state right next door to us. And, but they're also working on transit-oriented development in their towns in New Jersey. One of my Columbia teams, I teach what's called the capstone at Columbia. It's like a group thesis. So one of the projects that in the last couple of years was a look at transit-oriented development in New Jersey and help it along a little bit. And they're working on that so people can my dream would be people wake up in the morning, walk out the door, not have to drive anywhere. Even in Long Island and Westchester, I still find it hard to believe that they have to get up, they have to get in their car, then they have to drive to their station, and then they get into I'd love to see more just pure mass transit. They leave it, and I own a car. I'm not going to say I don't own a car. I do, but I think getting to work, going to school, going to recreation, going to Madison Square Garden, Citi Field, MetLife Stadium, even you can get to think. Going places, you should be able to, easily be able to have that option of taking mass transit.
I absolutely agree.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that I live on a street that just had a redesign a couple of years ago to add a bus lane, and the difference that it makes in terms of commuting is incredible. So, we need more bus lanes, we need more dedicated bus lanes, we need more bike lanes that are protected. Just green paint is great. It looks nice, but we need to keep cars out of those bus lanes. We need to prevent people from parking in them. And we need more connectivity with City Bike, especially here in Queens. Like if, the end of the 7 line connected to City Bike, so many more people could easily travel around their area. Now, obviously, biking's not for everybody, but if we had protected bike lanes, it'd be for a lot more people. And I know a couple of people who travel, who are in wheelchairs, and they love the bike lanes because it's a safe place for them to travel, and it's smoother and more accessible than the sidewalks because you don't have to worry about the curbs. So those are infrastructure changes that we can make in our city to make mass transit work better and to make it safer to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist.
That's really interesting. I was going to say before we started on here today, I was telling Tom a quick story about how I actually used to have, and this is going to date myself a little bit, a 10-game package to the Yankees for about $180, where I would jump on New Jersey Transit for each game, go in, hop the subway, and be there and just have a great time. But I remembered also the public perception of the subway changing over time. And then there'd be times where my mom would say, "Oh, hell no, you're not going to the subway, you're doing something else. Figure it out." How much is something like that, public perception, a hindrance to getting people to go on mass transit more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been taking the train since I was 13 years of age. I went to Brooklyn Tech, so I took the train from Bay Ridge to DeKalb
That's a
Avenue
trek for high school.
every day at 13 years of age. And I remember, it was such a much more dilapidated system. Now that was the 70s and 80s, right? So looking back at history, it was the federal government would fund new systems, like the Washington Metro, Atlanta, they would fund it. They didn't actually fund rehabilitation, but it was convincing the federal government that you had to invest in New York City's current infrastructure to bring the state of good repair to a place where it wouldn't break down. So I remember, I've seen the evolution of what trains I used to ride on, and if you remember, if you got stuck in the subway tunnel, it not only was stuck, it would turn dark. You'd be if the lights would come off, and it was, but it's changed. I've seen the complete change, the newer stations, newer cars, and we continue to evolve, even, over the last 2.5 decades, and new lines, Second Avenue, some other newer types of track, and so I've seen, because we're doing $5 billion worth of work every year, and it's not only expansion, but it's also putting money, investing in the system. So you have to invest in the system. You have to invest in the security. You have to invest in, a lot of the projects that we've had over the last decade, eliminating like blind spots, trying to keep things open, people some, more sense of security. Actually, there's one project that I worked on. I don't know if you've ever been on the 96th Street station. When I go up to Columbia or City College, I changed to at the 96th Street. We actually designed it. We have a glass enclosure, head house there, or station house. We actually designed it to actually have sunshine on the platform.
It's really nice.
and so just those thought processes. Stillwell Terminal, it comes to mind, where in addition to rebuilding the station with solar panels on top, we actually opened it up because there was many different areas of where people could hide and do bad things to people. So we created a much more open space, so visibility, you could see what was going on. So there was a thought process there while they were designing it. So you have to think, today's day, we have much more security issues, right? So you have to think of how are we going to, keep an eye on what's going on? How can we respond quickly to, issues that are going on in the transit system? We have to bring those people onto our transit system. And I would say, again, with the advent of videos on phones, something happens on the train, and then all of a sudden 8 million people see it every day. And so, and it's not that doesn't exist, it's true, but we have to do a really good job of making the people feel safe on the train. And I think more it's getting better. I mean, I think over the last year or so, but summer's coming, and people who don't have places to live tend to hang out on the train, especially at night with the air conditioning.
Sure.
So there's got to, there has to be, we have to keep understanding that and work with the rest of the city. Because, even though it's funny, we're a state agency, but we work here in the city. So we have to work together with the city, the state, and all the different agencies. It's really, no, the city isn't just run by one person. It's run by a conglomerate of many, many different agencies, and people have to do their part. Con Edison, DOT, MTA. One thing I'd love to see is more bus rapid transit. And we don't actually have bus rapid transit here. We have we call it select service. We have bus lanes, right? And in fact, a couple of things about bus rapid transit is what's called signal prioritization, right? So that the bus driver can actually hold a green light so it can move through, just keep the bus moving. But one of the real big difference is the fact it's a bus lane, which means people can get in that lane, right? If a true bus rapid transit is a complete infrastructure that only the bus is on. There's no double parker waiting to get groceries.
FedEx track park
right?
there while they're delivering. Yeah, same thing for the bus lanes.
What's up?
I wanted to add one thing to what you're saying, because this question of safety comes up a lot, and so much is about the framing, because in reality, it is much more dangerous to be in your car. You are far more likely to die or be seriously injured driving in your car than you are likely to have anything happen to you on the subway. But you know what? We don't have 24/7 news coverage of how many people are harmed in vehicles every day. In fact, more people die in New York City in vehicle accidents than die in violence. But it doesn't create the media hysteria. We don't have press conferences about it. The news cameras don't show up. So there's this perception that public transit is somehow dangerous, when in fact it's much safer than private transportation.
And part of that too, I wonder, is it just because people have a hard time at times getting out of their comfort zones, or very comfortable being in their cars, like a routine? I've talked to some people before generally about why electric vehicle adoption hasn't taken off more. There's a lot of different theories about that, but could it just be argued that cars are part of our culture?
Well, we unfortunately, we've designed our cities to be car centric, right? To create places for their cars to be parked. One thing, I've never driven into the city in 3 decades. Because where are you going to park? Like to me, like that's my favorite part about mass transit. I don't have to park my mass transit vehicle. I think, going back to that study, we were talking about the Columbia students did. One of the there was actually regulations. If you built a building with X amount of people, you had to have a certain amount of parking.
Right.
So that's what we attack, to eliminate that. Build the cities around pedestrians, about biking. I remember going to Munich in 2008. I was amazed at how many people bike, like all the time, like whether it was going to work in the morning, whether it was in the evening. But one thing they had, their bike lanes were on the sidewalk, right? So they had the the person inside and the bike side, and it's much safer. It's much safer because biking here in the city, it's kind of a bike lane. It's almost very dangerous here. So I think we even need to create more biking infrastructure that's much like bus rapid transit,
Yes.
bike transit, so that it's this is where the people bike. And I remember one thing I loved. I went to one of the stations in Munich, and there was the stairway, but then there was also like a ramp. It's a ramp, and they take their bike, they ramp into the station, and then there's this big, huge storage box where you can lock your bike up in the the bowels of the Munich station, and then you go on your business wherever you go, and then you come back and you take your bike and you go back up the ramp and you go back home. So you have to design these features to encourage it. And I definitely think, there's, there are just so many quicker ways to get around the city. And mass transit is the way to go. You want to, I know, like I said, I have a car. I've driven since I'm 16, but I hate traffic. And you know what? Also, as a professional, I found out, when you're in traffic, what are you doing? You're creating pollution spots. You're creating, like this hub of pollution whenever, wherever you are. And so, I wasn't thinking about that, when I was a kid driving, but now I see, traffic is, makes our air quality, especially in localized areas, much worse. So we want to, that's one good thing about electric vehicles when we have electric vehicles, or even if we get to autonomous vehicles, they will be able to talk to each other, and they will be able to move much more efficiently. And maybe, again, we have a long way to go before we get there. But we have to also use this, amazing technologies that are existing today, and use them in a good way. One of the things I think engineers do, I'm an engineer, and I think one of the things that we do is we need to go out and find those advanced technologies and bring them into our mainstream capital construction projects.
Absolutely agree. And I was actually lucky enough to see a couple of those autonomous vehicles at the NAP conference in Phoenix last year, and see what they have planned for the horizon for the next 3 to 5 years. And they think those things have a lot of potential. You mentioned, but actually both of you mentioned at times the off possibility of traveling to other cities, other countries to potentially learn what they're doing in a certain type of system and bring it back, if possible, to New York. How exactly does that process go? Do you just see something that, hey, this looks kind of cool, I kind of want to dig into it more?
Oh yeah, I went to 2008. I was very lucky. The Federal Transit Administration offered different transit professionals from different cities to go to Europe on a trip. And I was very lucky. I went to Munich, Dublin, Milan, and Bilbao, Spain in a 2 week span. All expenses paid. And I saw a lot of things going on there. And the mentality of mass transit or mass transport when you go to Europe, it's much different, and it's a way of life. Like, for instance, American people want to go on vacation. What do? They either drive somewhere or fly somewhere. In Europe, they'll take the train somewhere. I like to see people see more of that here. I love taking the train to Philadelphia and Washington, by the way. But I remember there's one of the major sustainable initiatives in mass transit, especially in the trains, is called regenerative braking. And this is where, when the train slows down, where when the motor person wants to move the train forward and accelerate, you demand electricity from the third rail. So when it decelerates, it reverses the polarity of the motor, becomes an engine actually, or it becomes a generator, and it actually moves energy back into the third rail. So we're trying to capture that energy in the third rail. And here in New York, we're still working on, we have it, almost all trains now come with it. And so if there's a train in the same vicinity, in the same line, while a train is slowing down, another one is, demanding it, then you can use that energy there. In Philadelphia, in SEPTA, actually, they actually gone one step further. They're actually using energy storage system batteries to store the energy. They don't have as much between, from one train to another as we do. So it's a little further apart. So, but they've actually used these energy storage systems to actually capture this regen. And then when another train comes by, they can use it. So that's future. When I went to Bilbao, Spain, they even went one step further than that. They're sending the energy back into the grid, into the power grid. So, that would be fantastic here. You have to work with, a lot of different entities, especially Con Edison, in order to, remember, over a decade, it was very difficult to get excess solar energy back into the grid, right? So it's not an easy thing. There's a lot of safety issues involved, and there was a lot of pushback. But we have to have a grid that is sufficient and safe enough to not only give energy, but actually bring it back and make it more efficient. So these are the types of things that I actually learned when going to Europe and bringing back here in America. And I actually use those case studies in my book, Sustainable Mass Transit.
Oh, cool. I want to check out your book. We don't actually have to look at this point to Europe for examples, because if we look in California, right, the buses are now both taking electricity out of the grid and putting electricity back into the grid. And, it's not it's not something foreign. It's something that we're doing here. The thing that really always strikes me when I go to, I was just in Geneva not too long ago. Actually, it was before COVID, so it was a long time ago, but time has blurred. And I was in Geneva because I was doing something at the UN, but I had a day off and I wanted to go into the mountains. And so I got on the trolley on my street. I took it to the train station. I got on a train, a rapid intercity train. I took it to, a connection point where I got on another local train that I took to a trolley to the mountain. And it was the French part of Geneva, and I don't speak French, but it was seamless. It was simple. And everything worked perfectly. And it was, I made this incredible day trip on, I must have been on like 4 or 5 different mass transits along the way. They all connected to each other. It got me to this remote little village, and I hiked around, and then I did the same thing in reverse. We could have that here.
Okay, that's a great spot to jump into this, because I think we also just set a record for going the longest in any episode without talking about climate change. Obviously, one of the biggest drivers that we have or are going to have coming up. How do increasing climate impacts affect transportation and environmental justice, particularly in New York City?
Oh, that's a really big question, because there are so many impacts from so many different directions. Think about Hurricane Ida. Think about what happened to the Major Deegan Expressway. Right? It was, it's always an expressway in quotes because it's full of traffic, but it was 10 feet of water. And we're going to see that more and more. A lot of people died. They died in basements. They didn't necessarily die on the highway, but we're going to see more and more of that. The roads are not going to be sustainable. And of course, every car and every truck on them adds to the problem. So one of the great challenges we have is that those of us who are creating the problem also have to solve the problem. And that makes it very difficult. I think it's going to, the climate realities that we're seeing more and more, roads are eroding on the coast. It's very difficult to maintain coastal roads now. As the sea level rises, that's going to be even more difficult as we have more serious cloudbursts like we've been having here in New York. The roads are going to be flooded. I think that people are seeing that and are now saying, oh, this is not what we want. And that's the key thing, is people have to demand change, because we have all of the technology we need to transform our economy and respond to the climate crisis. We don't need magic. We don't need new technologies. We just need the political will to use the technologies that we have and to require that they be used to shift us from fossil fuel-based electricity and fossil fuel-based motoring to something more sustainable.
Yeah, I would say going back to I started my career in the 80s as a young engineer, and then became a professional engineer in the 90s, and there was a lot of pushback about climate change, because I've talked about it for years, and you got a lot of laughs. Oh yeah, climate change, right? Climate's always changing, blah blah blah. But Superstorm Sandy, I think, drove that note. It affected everybody here in New York City. The transit system was flooded. The lights went out. It was not anymore a theoretical thing. It was actually real. And I think that changed a lot of minds at that time, because now we have proof. And in fact, if you remember, right before Hurricane Sandy, the year before, I'm blanking on the name, but I think it was Hurricane Irene. Like one
That's
year,
right,
like
it was.
almost like an anniversary. And so I just happened to be interviewed for a Scientific American magazine about it, and I think the headline was, the 100-year storm that happens every year, and
Exactly.
talk about the impacts on the transit system. And we're 350 miles of tunnel below New York City, so when the city floods, guess where all that water goes? It goes into our system. And so we had to take it seriously. We had tremendous impacts, billions and billions of dollars of impacts to our electrical system. We have electricity running through our system. You always have, you build your subway tunnel with the fact that water is going to get in, and so you have a pumping system.
Right.
And so, but the pumping, at some point the pumping system was, pumping to a flooded sewer already. So we had to. I think that was the turning point. I think, especially here in New York City. I think Ida, was it a couple of years ago? We had 9 inches of rain. My favorite part about that was that actually started as a hurricane in the Gulf, right? And it was it was kind of like, oh, it's in the Gulf. But I remember, again, this is a little 2020 hindsight, but I'll gonna say, I remember when I saw when it hit land, like around the New Orleans area, or a little, and probably not directly New Orleans, but that area of Louisiana or Mississippi. I followed the path. It went right to New York City. Like the land path was going right to New York City. So for people to say, well, that was a surprise, wasn't a surprise to me. I saw it, and so you not only had the 9 inches of rain that day, so you had a day of rain, but then there was a time in the early evening where we had 3 inches of rain all at once, like in an hour. And our sewer system here is maybe built for an inch and a half, and that is with not having 8 inches of rain already there. And one thing, as a Brooklynite, somebody who's been here a long time, we know after every rainstorm, what do we normally see? We see clogged sewers, right? So I can honestly say I've never been in a sewer my whole life. Oh, a big fan of the honeymooners at Norton, being a sewer worker, so I'm very familiar with people who work in the sewers. But I could just tell you they're clogged, and they need cleaning. And then so I think when people want to say, oh, we got to expand the sewer systems, well, let's clean them out. Let's maintain them. Let's get more space. We have to manage water coming in, because it's not going to change anytime soon.
And can I just add that we have to divert water out of our sewer system. We have a combined sewer overflow system throughout most of the city, which means that when we get more than a very light rainfall, untreated sewage goes directly into the rivers, because the system can't handle it. And what we need porous surfaces, that we need bioswales, we need rain gardens, we need green roofs, we need infrastructure that is going to capture that rainwater, keep it out of the sewer system, and turn it into something much more manageable. We need permeable pavement. I mean, all of these things exist. We just need to have them.
Yeah, that's really interesting though too. Just talking about the cloud burst phenomena again for a minute. I can't tell you how many times I've read just around the world of 9 inches of rain in 8 hours, or a month and a half of rain in 5 hours, just happening again and again and again. And you think at first pass, can any built system handle this? But then I think if we can do smart improvements and get better at maintenance and clean out the sewers, as Tom was saying, and possibly do something about the impervious surface, it's all great steps. But just devil's advocate, I guess, for a bit, can changing any one highway from impervious to natural cover actually make a tangible effect?
No one thing is going to change everything, but changing as much as we can, as fast as we can, is essential. And, we're going to face some real challenges. I mean, places that people live are going to be uninhabitable, even if we get a handle on the climate crisis in the near future. I mean, that we've done that to ourselves. But, the first rule of holes, right, is when, stop digging. And that is what we need to do. We need to start taking action every way that we can, everywhere that we can, so that we can minimize the impacts, and especially minimize the impacts on the people who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, I want to actually go back to part of the beginning of our program here. 2006, 2007, we started a rehabilitation project in Harlem, the Mother Clara Hale Bus Depot, right there in the middle of Harlem.
Yeah, good example.
I was called into a meeting with our government relations staff, and WEACT was in the room, and they were against us. As Rebecca has mentioned, we had 5 bus depots in the northern part of Manhattan, where most of the kids with asthma are located. And so they brought me in because WEACT were asking for a green and clean building. And without hesitation, without actually looking at my superiors, because I figured, hey, we can do that. We can build these a facility that is the greenest and cleanest. And we actually had we had a community charrette. And I think this is, again, many of the points I want to make here is we actually had a major construction project. We actually brought the community in to help us design it. And what did they want to see in a bus depot? If it was going to be there, let's make it the best it could possibly be. So we spent a Saturday afternoon with the community, and they were looking for a green roof, a rainwater collection, and we kind of worked with them and said we could do that. I know we could do that. We had a smaller green roof in one of our facilities, but this was like a major green roof, and so we built this, completed it in 2014. That's how long these things take, from 2008 to 2014. It was 2015 with the opening, but we're actually going to have a celebration soon on the 10-year anniversary, because I think it was a change. I think it was a kind of a change project where we actually said, let's invite, this is their community, right? This is where they live, and and let's build this together, and let's make up something that everyone could be proud of, and everyone had input. One of the things that we, my staff and I, we talked about designing with a green roof with rainwater collection. So actually, it's the building itself. Every drop of rain that falls on that, it's either going to be absorbed by the green roof, or it's going to be collected in a 50,000-gallon tank that we could use to wash the buses. And we actually have a bus wash reclamation system, recycling system. So any drop of water on that property never will find its way to the sewer. But one thing that they had asked us is, for a sense of security, they wanted us to drop down some of the windows of the facility to be at like street level, to give the understanding that, hey, instead of a blank brick wall, there would be perhaps somebody on the other side of that window looking, sort of a neighborhood watch thing there. And so we actually absorbed that info from the facility and did the best we can to incorporate that. They also wanted, local artwork adorning the facility, and we had a local artist did the Mother Clara Hale mural, and we actually had little kids did coloring, and we actually figured out a way to incorporate that into the glass. But awesome. One last thing, we also incorporated local work jobs. So our construction jobs will hire thousands of people, but we wanted to make sure that the community had a good deal of those jobs, given to them. It's one of the things I met Charles Rangel. I actually met him. I'm working for him at the city at CUNY. So he talked about that, having opportunities for our infrastructure projects to give training to people in the neighborhood so that they could actually be part of it. And I told them about our Mother Clara Hale thing. I kind of promised them we do it on Second Avenue. So I hope I gotta fulfill that promise, because we gotta, we have to train, we have to give them OSHA training, we have to give them some so that they can be on these jobs. That, when you have construction projects, you're talking about thousands of jobs, that are available.
Absolutely. Then, well, I gotta say thank you both. You've given a lot of great stuff to think about. But just as one final question here, and I guess also concluding thoughts, if you had any potential advice for people who want to learn more about these topics, especially from the community, first, what would you tell them? And then if you have any advice on sources.
Do you want to go first?
Go
ahead. So I would encourage people to read the New York City Environmental Justice Report. It's available online. It is a very detailed and very good report that will give a sense of the historical roots of the problems that we face today, as well as what those problems are. In terms of what to do about those problems, there are a couple of documents that are worth looking at. One is the 1991 First National People of Colors Environmental Leadership Summit. It was held in Washington, D.C., and it issued a statement of principles that are the principles that guide most practitioners and most advocates for environmental justice. There's also a document called the Jemez Principles, which in particular, one of the things that we've been talking about without naming is the idea that communities speak for themselves. I think the example that Thomas just gave is a great example of communities speaking for themselves about what their concerns are, and responsive government officials listening and making a plan that actually meets those needs. So those are places I would direct people to find information that's freely available to them. I also would encourage people to check out the environmental justice comic books. They're really a useful educational tool. They're also beautifully illustrated by an incredibly talented artist named Charlie LaGreca Velasco. And trying to think of other free sources. There's a lot of literature online. If you just do a search for sort of environmental justice and transportation, and you will find a massive literature about the pollution, the health effects of pollution, and about how we can change things and what sort of community positive transit looks like.
Yeah, my whole career, I think I think back, it's funny when you think back of your career, it's kind of like, when it's happening, it's like everything is chaos. But then when you look back on it, it's almost like a well-chaptered book. So one of my accelerations of development was being part of organizations. Transportation Research Board comes to mind. APTA, American Public Transportation Administration. There are lots of committees, thousands of committees, and dealing with all different types of transportation issues. I've been on committees on, when it comes to environment and sustainability and that, but they all, are commissioned to do papers, and they're all free. Well, they're not all free, but most of them are free. And you can find those publications by practitioners, and also the good news is also they also include academics, so you can get an awful lot of reading material from professors in that are publishing papers. I would also say my book, Sustainable Mass Transit, is a good resource. And I actually bought your book, Rebecca, naming New York.
Naming Gotham.
Actually, I have it right here. Naming Gotham.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
I wish I had yours to show. I'm going to get it because it's like the sweet spot of my interest.
It's so interesting. It just arrived. But one thing I found my favorite part, and probably more favorite parts, it was actually two or three. The Outer Bridge and the Goethals Bridge, right? So George Washington Goethals, I love that name. And they all and Outer Bridge, that was his name.
Yeah. That's
Right?
why it's a
Most-
crossing.
Right. Most people think it's an outer bridge crossing, but it's actually named after outer bridge.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
not too many people know that. So,
First chair of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
right. And the thing is, if you read, I read a couple of those chapters, it's almost like the same thing's going on. Like
Yeah.
the same political discourse is
Yeah.
happening, 150 years ago. So, as I mentioned, learning history is such an important part of figuring out where you're going forward. And the other interesting part is, as I was talking to Chris, I know it sounds like he's a Yankee fan. I'm a Met fan, and
As you should be.
and
I'm
Bill
outnumbered.
Shea Stadium was named after Bill Shea, and he has my birthday, June 21st. So symmetry there.
Well, one thing I want to say is if you're a professional engineer, make sure you check out the chapter on Sheridan because he helped create the category of professional engineer, and he was the second president of the Professional Engineers Association.
Oh, the more you know. How about that?
He saw it as a way to ward off unionization.
Huh.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. And it was really, Chris, thank you for inviting me and thank you for introducing me to Rebecca because this was a lot of fun. I looked down, I was like, it's 5 o'clock already. Wow.
I know, I did the same thing. It was really such fun talking to both of you.
I really appreciate that, and thank you both. And again, that's one of the ideas of this podcast, and the point of getting multiple experts on at the same time, because collaborations happen all the time. So you never know what can come after this. But again, thank you both again. You did an excellent job. And just everyone listening, if you're not already following us, we're on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, basically all the podcast platforms. And if anyone knows me, I'm pretty shameless on LinkedIn, so you probably find me there. And the next episode, we have Sean Moriarty and Jeremy Orr coming on to talk about related issues. And until then, I will sign off and say thank you very much.